"Who are you?" shouted a millionaire upon finding 4 babies at the entrance of his mansion. But when he discovered the truth behind that mystery, he couldn't hold back his tears. It was exactly 11:47 p.m. when the vintage Rolls-Royce rolled through the ornate gates of the Donovan estate. Heavy raindrops pelted the tinted windows of the car, where Paul Donovan massaged his temples, exhausted from 12 hours of back-to-back meetings. His fingers, showing the marks of 5 decades of relentless work, adjusted his Italian silk tie, a mechanical ritual he performed whenever he came home. The rearview mirror reflected a face marked by time, penetrating grey eyes, meticulously trimmed silver hair, and worry lines carved around an austere mouth. Peering out the car window, he surveyed his 2-acre property, a territory he had conquered much like everything else in his life, with unwavering determination and zero margin for error. The perfectly geometric gardens, now battered by the storm, stood as yet another testament to his obsessive control over everything and everyone. "You can drop me off here, Anthony," he murmured to the driver, his gaze locked on the mansion's main door. 55 years of calculated decisions had turned that once ambitious orphan into the owner of a vast empire. The genuine leather Mont Blanc briefcase weighed in his right hand. Inside, his contracts worth several $1,000,000 would soon be added to his already considerable fortune. The wind howled between the century-old trees in the garden, shaking the leaves with unusual force. Paul ascended the Italian marble steps, each footstep echoing in the silence of the stormy night. The porch lights, programmed to illuminate automatically upon his arrival, cast restless shadows against the mansion's classical columns. Then his right foot froze in mid-air. A cry, weak, almost drowned out by the storm. Then another, coming from a different direction, and yet another. His eyes scanned the luxurious porch, stopping on 4 identical wicker baskets arranged in a perfect semicircle. His heart, accustomed for years to beating in sync with spreadsheets and contracts, started racing faster than it had since his very first hostile takeover. "Who are you?" The shout erupted from his throat, echoing across the empty grounds. The words were swallowed by the howling wind and the pounding of the rain on the imported slate roof. With hesitant steps, he approached the first basket. His hands, just hours ago signing $1,000,000 agreements, trembled as he lifted the delicate pink blanket. A baby, not more than a few weeks old, gazed up at him with remarkably familiar blue eyes, the same shade of blue he saw in his own reflection every morning. The second basket revealed another baby, identical to the first. In the third, yet another. When he reached the 4th basket, Paul Donovan, the man who never showed emotion in public, felt his legs nearly give out. Quadruplets, perfectly identical, brand new to the world. Tucked among the blankets of the last basket lay a white envelope. Inside, a single phrase in elegant handwriting: "Take care of them." "My God," he whispered, his voice disappearing into the stormy night. The past few months flashed through his mind like a movie reel. Julia, the 32-year-old gallery owner. How long had it been? 6, 7 months. Her repeated attempts to reach him in the past few weeks, all blocked by his efficient secretaries, following his explicit instructions. The rain now soaked through his $10,000 Italian suit, but Paul barely noticed. His eyes darted from one baby to the next, while his usually shrewd mind, silent for the first time in decades, felt utterly paralyzed. The tiny faces seemed to study him with disconcerting intensity, as though they knew exactly who he was. "Mrs. Clare!" His voice cut through the night like thunder. "Mrs. Clare!" Hurried footsteps echoed inside the mansion. The housekeeper, who had managed his home for 20 years with the same efficiency he managed his businesses, appeared at the door. Her normally impassive face changed instantly at the sight. Her always impeccable employer, drenched in the rain, 4 baskets at his feet, and the baby's cries mingling with the raging storm. "Mr. Donovan?" Her voice quavered slightly, something that had never happened in 2 decades of service. "Call Dr. Price immediately," he ordered, his authoritative tone barely masking the tremor in his hands as he picked up the first baby. "And prepare the guest rooms on the 2nd floor, all of them." The small bundle in his arms weighed both like lead and like a feather. And Mrs. Clare, not a word about this, not to anyone. In the hours that followed, the usually quiet mansion plunged into what could best be described as orderly chaos. Nurses were discreetly summoned, arriving one by one in unmarked cars. Rooms that had long served only to impress the occasional visitor were quickly transformed with cribs and hastily delivered equipment. In his library, Paul sat in a leather chair, staring at a 50-year-old whiskey left untouched on the mahogany table. His eyes shifted between the mysterious note and the flames dancing in the fireplace. The fire cast restless shadows on the tall bookcases lining the walls, rare volumes that, like everything in his life, were more a status symbol than a true interest. The grandfather clock chimed softly, announcing it was 2:02 a.m. Upstairs, in what had become a makeshift nursery, 4 tiny lives slept under the watchful eyes of the nurses. 4 mysteries that had arrived with the storm to challenge everything Paul Donovan believed about control and predictability. His fingers brushed across the note again. 3 words. Just 3 words had been enough to shatter the carefully built wall between his personal and professional life. Take care of them. The simplicity of the message was almost cruel in its ambiguity. For the first time in decades, the man who ruled an empire realized he now controlled nothing at all. The same mind that could dissect complex financial reports in minutes now stumbled over simple questions. Who? Why? How? He stood and walked to the window. The storm still raged outside, as if nature itself reveled in the chaos that had just settled into his meticulously ordered life. The flawlessly manicured gardens, his pride and the emblem of his control, were at the mercy of the elements, just as he was at the mercy of this mystery that had arrived in 4 little baskets. A distant cry echoed through the mansion's corridors. Paul closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of his 55 years. Somewhere in this house, one of those babies, his child, needed comforting. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. In a few hours, the sun would rise, bringing with it the need for decisions and actions. Investigations would begin, discretion would be maintained, and a new reality would have to be managed. But for now, in the solitude of his library, Paul Donovan allowed himself to do something he hadn't done in a very long time: simply admit he did not know what came next. Outside, the storm persisted, relentless and uncontrollable, much like the fate that had just knocked on his door. The first morning bottle slipped from the nurse's trembling fingers, shattering the silence along with the glass. Paul watched from his chair in the corner of the makeshift nursery, where he had spent the last few hours. He hadn't slept. The dark circles beneath his grey eyes told of a sleepless night, but his mind was far away, exactly 6 months and 17 days ago. Julia had come into his life like the previous night's storm, unexpected and overwhelming. The opening reception at her contemporary art gallery had drawn high society's elite, and Paul had attended only to keep up appearances. That's when he saw her, honey-colored hair cascading in soft curls over bare shoulders, champagne glass in one hand, animatedly gesturing as she explained the meaning of an abstract painting. "Mr. Donovan!" The nurse's voice brought him back to the present. "This baby is hungry." His eyes focused on the little bundle in her arms, the third of the quadruplets, whom he could already tell apart by a tiny birthmark behind the right ear. The baby's hungry cries echoed Julia's parting words. "You can't just cast me aside like one of your failed investments, Paul." And that was exactly what he had done. As he'd done for 30 years, ever since discovering that relationships were unpredictable variables that only complicated his perfectly calculated success equation. He stood up, smoothing the rumpled jacket he'd worn through the night. His phone vibrated in his pocket, likely another message from his assistant about the board meeting he was supposed to chair in 2 hours. A meeting he would miss for the first time in his career. "Anthony," he called his driver through the intercom, "bring me the complete file from our personal contact filtering system for the last 8 months, and call Bernard." Bernard had been his private investigator for 2 decades, the man who knew how to find anyone, solve any mystery, for the right price. And for Paul Donovan, price was never an issue. In the makeshift nursery, now bathed in morning light, the nurses moved silently and efficiently among the 4 cribs. Paul meticulously observed each baby, looking for any hint of Julia in their tiny features, or perhaps it was traces of himself. The uncertainty gnawed at him like acid. His relationship with Julia had lasted exactly 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Just long enough for her to breach his carefully constructed defenses, but not long enough to change decades of ingrained habits. "Sir, you have a call from the Lambert Gallery," his secretary had announced that fateful morning. "Block it," he had replied automatically down without looking away from his computer screen. "But, sir, this is the 4th time today." "I said block it." The system was perfect. 3 layers of human filters before any personal contact could reach him. First the receptionists, then the assistant secretaries, and finally his executive secretary. All trained for one mission, keeping his personal life separate from his business. It had worked for 30 years, until that morning. "Mr. Donovan," Bernard appeared in the nursery's doorway, quiet as a shadow. "The preliminary reports have arrived." Paul followed the investigator to his library. On the mahogany desk lay a thin folder containing Julia Lambert's life, compiled into carefully arranged pages. 32 years old, owner of the Nouveau Art Gallery, no children, single, last known location, an international airport 3 months ago, boarding a flight to Los Angeles. And after that, nothing, sir. It's like she vanished. Paul closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. Julia's last words echoed in his mind. "You'll regret not listening to me, Paul. There are things even all your money can't control." A sharp cry interrupted his thoughts. In the nursery, one baby had awakened the other 3, creating a symphony of wails that resonated through the mansion's corridors. Paul watched the nurses rush from crib to crib, trying to soothe them. "Keep searching," he ordered Bernard. "I want to know every single step she took over the last 9 months, every doctor's appointment, every trip, every purchase. And most importantly, I need to know where she is right now." The investigator nodded and vanished as quietly as he had come, leaving Paul alone with his thoughts and the folder about Julia. His fingers brushed against a photo taken the night he met her. Honey-colored hair, soft curls cascading over bare shoulders, that confident smile that had disarmed him more than he cared to admit. Mrs. Clare appeared at the door, her usual composure tinged with concern. "Sir, the journalists have started calling. Someone must have spotted the nurses arriving last night." Paul instinctively adjusted his tie, a habit whenever he needed to regain control. "No statements, to anyone," he said firmly. "And, Mrs. Clare, prepare the blue room, the one in the West Wing." It was the room that no one had used in years. A room he'd left exactly as Julia had last seen it on her final night in the mansion. The housekeeper hesitated briefly, surprised by the request, then nodded and left. Upstairs, the babies had finally settled down. The calm that returned to the mansion felt heavy with unanswered questions. Paul took out his phone and dialed a number he'd used only in emergencies for 30 years. "Jack, I need 4 birth certificates, and your utmost discretion." He hung up and walked to the window. The garden, still ravaged by last night's storm, was beginning to recover under the morning sun. Like his life, it would need careful rearranging. But for the first time, Paul Donovan wasn't sure he even wanted everything under control again. In the pocket of his jacket, the note with 3 words felt as heavy as lead. "Take care of them." Could this be Julia's handwriting? Her parting words now seemed like a prophecy fulfilled. The soft sound of quiet sobs drifted down the hallway. Paul adjusted his jacket and headed for the nursery. He had an empire to run, a reputation to protect, a mystery to solve. But at that moment, something more urgent was calling him. On the 2nd floor, 4 pairs of blue eyes, his eyes, waited for answers that, for the first time in his life, Paul Donovan wasn't sure he wanted to find. Dr. Price's private lab occupied an entire floor in his high-tech medical facility. Amid state-of-the-art equipment and the soft hum of computers, Paul Donovan waited for the results that would change his life forever. "Mr. Donovan," the doctor's voice carried an undertone Paul couldn't decipher. "We've located Julia Lambert." Paul straightened in the leather chair, his body taut as a violin string. On the computer screen in front of him, surveillance footage showed Julia boarding a flight to Milan just 3 days ago. Her midsection looked notably flat beneath her silk dress. "Impossible," he muttered, his fingers drumming nervously on the glass tabletop. "The babies are less than a month old." "Exactly." Dr. Price shifted his glasses, directing his gaze to another screen displaying complex data. "And there's more." The doctor turned the monitor so Paul could see a series of figures that looked like hieroglyphics to him. But one piece of information, highlighted in red, stood out. 25% genetic compatibility. 25%? Paul's voice was louder than he intended. "What does that mean?" "That's the typical compatibility percentage between—" Dr. Price hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Between grandparents and grandchildren." A heavy silence followed. Paul felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. The doctor's words resounded in his mind like a jarring bell. "That's impossible," he finally managed, his voice tight. "I don't have—" The sentence died on his lips as a sudden memory hit him like a punch. Thomas, his only son, gone just over a year ago in a car accident. Thomas, with his identical blue eyes, his bohemian lifestyle, his countless relationships. Mr. Donovan, Bernard, his investigator, materialized in the lab doorway like a shadow. "There's something you need to see." With unsteady legs, Paul followed Bernard to the car. The driver drove in silence through the city streets, while the investigator showed him photos on a tablet. "In the past 18 months, your son kept a secret apartment in the historic district," Bernard explained, scrolling through images. "And there was a young woman who visited him frequently." Paul studied the surveillance photos. Thomas, smiling in a way Paul hadn't seen him smile in years, accompanied by a beautiful dark-haired woman. It wasn't Julia. Back at the mansion, the babies awaited his return. Paul went straight to the nursery, where nurses were tending to the late afternoon feedings. He looked at each tiny face with new eyes, searching for, finding traces of Thomas in every feature. "This one has the same birthmark he had," he whispered to himself, gently touching the small spot behind the third baby's ear. "Exactly like Thomas." The fourth baby gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Paul felt something inside him shatter. These weren't his children, they were his grandchildren. Thomas's legacy, arriving like a storm to turn his life upside down. "Mr. Donovan," Mrs. Clare appeared at the door, as discreet as ever. "Dr. Price has sent more results." In the library, Paul examined the new data. More tests confirming the quadruplets were Thomas's children, but the mother's identity remained a mystery. The evidence indicated in vitro fertilization, explaining the multiples. "I need more," he told Bernard over the phone. "I want a list of every person Thomas interacted with during the last year of his life. Every place he went, every conversation he had." That evening, Paul cancelled all his meetings for the following week, something he had never done in his entire career. In the nursery, he picked up one of the babies, feeling the soft, warm weight against his chest. "Your dad was just like you," he whispered, his voice catching. He had the same curious eyes. The nurses exchanged surprised glances. It was the first time they had seen the powerful businessman show any emotion. On his desk lay a photo of Thomas at age 5, beaming a gap-toothed grin. It seemed to stare back at Paul with a touch of irony. Next to it, the mysterious letter, "Take care of them." The handwriting definitely wasn't Julia's. So whose was it? The mystery of the babies had deepened, but paradoxically, Paul felt closer to the truth. It was never about Julia. Never had been. It was about Thomas. About second chances. About redemption. "Mr. Donovan," Bernard interrupted his thoughts. "We discovered something about the young woman in the photos." Paul looked up, still gently rocking the baby. "She's the daughter of someone you used to know quite well," the investigator hesitated. "Robert Lambert." The name struck Paul like lightning. Robert Lambert, his best friend for 30 years until that fateful business deal tore them apart. Robert, who had a daughter the same age as Thomas, a daughter Paul had never met. The baby in his arms let out a little sigh, snuggling closer. Paul felt tears, long dormant, burn behind his eyes. "Keep investigating," he ordered Bernard, his voice trembling with pent-up emotion. But now I need a moment. Alone in the nursery, Paul Donovan, the man who had built an empire on control and predictability, allowed himself to simply feel the pain of losing Thomas, the shock of discovery, and the bittersweet joy of having a piece of his son return to him through these tiny miracles. Outside, and the city was settling in for the night. But within the Donovan estate, a new story was just beginning, one of secrets unveiled, forgiveness and redemption, and at its heart, 4 little babies who, without knowing it, had already changed everything. The mystery wasn't solved yet, but for the first time, Paul felt no rush to unravel it. Some truths he was beginning to understand need time to be fully grasped. And some blessings arrive disguised as mysteries. DNA is like a family fingerprint, Mr. Donovan, said Dr. Marie Lefebvre as she spread out colorful charts on her glass desk. Each marker tells a story. Paul studied the papers without really seeing them. His mind drifted to a faded photograph in his wallet. Thomas at 6 years old, smiling wide with one front tooth missing, clutching a chess trophy. It was the last time father and son had truly connected. As you can see here, the geneticist pointed to a complex sequence. There's a significant match between your DNA and the baby's, but it's not a direct parental match. What exactly does that mean? Paul adjusted his tie, his reflex when discomfort set in. 25% compatibility typically indicates a second-degree relationship. She paused carefully. Like a grandfather and grandchildren. The word grandfather hit Paul like a punch to the gut. Images of Thomas flooded his mind. The teenage son sneaking in after midnight, the escalating arguments, the attempts to mold him into a carbon copy of himself. Impossible, he murmured, but his voice betrayed his growing doubt. The markers are conclusive. She slid another chart his way. See this specific sequence. It's a rare hereditary trait in your family. It appeared in you, in your son, and now in the babies, Paul finished in a near whisper. Memories of his last encounter with Thomas played like a film in his mind. The fancy restaurant chosen to impress partners, Thomas arriving late, hair disheveled, paint stains on his hands, more invested in his art than in the family business. You can't force me to become you, Dad, his son's words still echoed. I won't spend my life locked in an office counting money. Money you don't hesitate to spend, Paul's own retort, sharp as a razor. Thomas had stormed out of the restaurant. It was the last time Paul ever saw him alive. Mr. Donovan, Dr. Lefebvre brought him back to the present. There's something else you should see. She displayed microscopic images of chromosomes. All 4 infants show a pattern consistent with in vitro fertilization. The mother must have undergone the procedure after... She hesitated. After his death, Paul said, feeling the gravity of it. His phone buzzed. A message from Bernard. We found his apartment. You need to see this. On the drive to the address, Paul relived that awful morning of the accident. The call at 4:37 a.m., the frantic rush to the hospital, the doctor's grim face. I'm sorry, we couldn't save him. Thomas had lost control of his car on a curve. He was alone, presumably coming back from some party, or so everyone believed. The apartment was in a bohemian neighborhood, so different from the privileged environments of Thomas's childhood. Bernard led him up a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. He rented this place secretly, the investigator explained, unlocking the door. Paid in cash, used a false name. Paul stepped into the studio and felt the air escape his lungs. The walls were covered with paintings, Thomas's works he had never seen before. Landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces. A talent Paul had always dismissed as mere hobby now screamed artistic value. This one is the most interesting, Bernard said, pointing to a canvas draped in cloth. Removing the cover, Paul froze. It was a portrait of a delicate-looking young woman with dark hair framing a face whose smile reached her eyes. The signature in the lower right corner read, For Emma, with love, T. Emma Lambert, Bernard said. Robert Lambert's daughter. The name hit Paul like a blow. Robert Lambert, his best friend for 3 decades, until a disastrous business deal tore them apart. Robert, who had a daughter close in age to Thomas. In a corner table lay a journal. Paul opened it with trembling hands, recognizing his son's handwriting. Emma's worried about how they'll react. How do I tell my father I fell in love with the daughter of the man he betrayed? How do I tell Robert I love his daughter? Maybe after the exhibit, once they see I've changed, that I've found my path. Paul closed the journal, feeling the weight of a decade's worth of regrets. His son had found love, art, purpose, and Paul had been too busy judging to notice. Back at the mansion, he climbed straight to the nursery. The 4 babies slept peacefully, unaware of the hurricane their arrival had unleashed. Paul approached the nearest crib, gazing at the tiny, sleeping face. "You have his nose," he whispered, gently touching the baby's hand. "And his eyes. My eyes." A nurse came in quietly to check on them. "They're quite calm," she commented, "as if they know they're home." Home. The word echoed in Paul's mind. These babies were part of Thomas, the last part he had left, and also part of a larger story he never saw coming. "Bernard," he called softly into the phone. "Focus your search on Emma Lambert. We need to find her." Hanging up, his gaze fell on the mysterious note. "Take care of them." Now, those words bore a new weight. Not just a request, but his son's final wish. In the silent nursery, Paul Donovan, who had always controlled everything, learned his most important lesson. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest regrets. Paul's office had turned into an improvised command center. The walls, once adorned with diplomas and accolades, were now covered with photos, newspaper clippings, and timelines. In the center of his mahogany desk, 4 open files awaited his attention. "Sophie Mercer," Bernard said, pointing to the first photo. It showed a striking young woman smiling on a New York Fashion Week runway, an international model who dated Thomas for 3 months last year. Paul studied the image. Sophie had vanished abruptly from the modeling scene, canceling million-dollar contracts. Her last known move, a rushed trip to Dubai. "We investigated medical records in Dubai," Bernard continued. "No indication of pregnancy. In fact," he hesitated, "she married a sheikh 2 months ago." A piercing cry interrupted them. On a monitor atop the desk, the live feed of the nursery showed one of the babies stirring awake. Paul watched as a nurse picked the child up, noting how quickly the infant recognized the nurse's voice. "Go on," he directed, his eyes still on the monitor. "Marie Dupont." Bernard introduced the second dossier, featuring a journalist with a keen gaze. She covered international politics when she met Thomas at an art exhibit. They dated for 6 months. Marie had been Thomas's most serious girlfriend. Paul remembered hearing his son mention her briefly at a couple of dinners. Then she suddenly took a posting in Africa. "We found her international vaccine records," Bernard said, placing some documents in front of Paul. "No sign of pregnancy when she left. Plus," he placed a recent photo on the table, Marie, visibly not pregnant, reporting from a conflict zone in Sudan. Paul stood and walked to the nursery. The babies were more active now, their tiny faces beginning to show emerging personalities. The third one, marked by that birthmark behind the ear, seemed to be the leader, always the first to cry for attention. "Mr. Donovan," Mrs. Clare entered quietly. "We've just received more information on Charlotte Weber. The German entrepreneur who had captivated Thomas with her sharp intellect and quick wit. Their relationship had lasted only 2 months, but it had been intense. She sold her startup for millions," Bernard explained when Paul returned to his office. "But that's not the interesting part, it's the timing. The dates aligned roughly with the baby's conception period." Paul's pulse quickened, but Bernard promptly dashed his hopes. "We found hospital records. Charlotte was in a skiing accident 8 months ago. Pregnancy would have been impossible." Paul let out a heavy sigh, his gaze drifting to the last file. Emma Lambert, the artist, Robert's daughter, the only one that really mattered. "Sir," a nurse said from the doorway, carrying one of the babies, "he won't stop crying. He usually calms down when you speak to him." Paul took the little one in his arms, surprised at how natural it felt. This was the second baby, the one with a slight habit of furrowing his brow, just like Thomas. Emma completely vanished, Bernard continued, lowering his voice so as not to disturb the baby. She sold her studio, cancelled all exhibits, closed her social media. It's as if she evaporated. But, Paul pressed gently, but we found this. Bernard showed a surveillance photo from 6 months ago, Emma entering a well-known fertility clinic. The baby in Paul's arms let out a little sigh, nestling closer. On the nursery monitor, the other 3 slept peacefully. The clinic refuses to release any information, Bernard added. Medical confidentiality. We'd need a court order. That would take weeks and draw unwanted attention, Paul concluded, gently rocking his grandson. His gaze traveled to the evidence wall. 4 women, 4 stories, 4 dead ends. Or were they? There's something about their eyes, he murmured, more to himself than to Bernard. Something familiar. Bernard stepped closer to the sleeping baby, studying his delicate features. They have your eyes, Mr. Donovan, and Thomas's, but their face shape. He glanced at Emma's photo on the wall. Look at the chin, the arch of the brows. Paul's heart skipped a beat. How had he not noticed sooner? The soft lines, the gentle curve, those were Emma's. I need to speak with Robert, he said suddenly. Sir, Bernard hesitated. Robert Lambert hasn't spoken to anyone in months. Since his daughter disappeared. The baby stirred in Paul's arms, blinking eyes that were undeniably Donovan blue in a face that was undeniably Lambert. Find a way, Paul said gently, mindful not to alarm the infant, no matter what it takes. When Bernard left, Paul remained where he was, cradling the baby, eyeing the other 3 through the monitor. 4 little miracles, born of love and secrets. Your father slept this way too, he whispered to the baby in his arms, and he had the same knack for turning my life upside down. On the monitor, one of the babies shifted, furrowing his brow just like his brother, and just like Thomas and like Paul himself. The truth was there, written in their faces, coursing through their veins. Paul no longer needed investigators or files to know. He just needed to find Emma and face Robert. But first, he had 4 little Donovan Lamberts to put to bed. And for the first time in his life, business could wait. The Art Deco building stood out against the sleek, modern skyline. Paul observed the peeling facade, the wrought-iron balconies, the tall windows, so different from the manicured world Thomas grew up in. 3rd floor, Bernard indicated, sliding an old key into the door. He rented this place under the name Thomas Lane. No one made the connection to the Donovans. The worn marble stairs held stories of a century past. Each step Paul climbed felt like a descent into his son's secret world. At the 3rd floor landing, a single dark green door awaited them. The lock clicked softly. The apartment was a spacious studio with floor-to-ceiling windows. The late afternoon light streamed in lazily, dancing over stacked canvases, forgotten brushes, scattered books. A faint smell of oil paint and stale coffee lingered in the air. My God, Paul whispered. The walls were plastered with portraits of women, some artistic, some clearly personal, smiles, glances, frozen moments in time, Thomas's record of his conquests. He kept meticulous records, Bernard commented, indicating a bookshelf lined with albums. Every encounter, every woman. Paul randomly picked one album. Sophie, First Night at the Met. Read the caption under a photo of the model. Further pages revealed more dates, more women, each meticulously documented, but a half-open drawer caught his eye. Inside it, stacks of letters, all addressed simply to Dad. With trembling hands, Paul opened the first. Dad, today, I sold my first painting. It wasn't to one of your rich friends buying out of obligation. It was someone who really saw something in my work. I wish you could see it too. The letter was dated 3 years ago. It had never been mailed. Another letter. Dad, I met someone. She's not like the others. She really sees me, beyond the Donovan name, but she's afraid of you. I am too. Paul sank into a worn leather armchair, letters scattered across his lap. Each one revealed a Thomas he'd never really known, the rebellious son stripped away, replaced with a thoughtful young artist searching for meaning. Mr. Donovan, Bernard said gently, holding up a black notebook, found this behind the bookshelf. The diary's cover was scuffed, showing signs of constant use. Paul opened it. Emma laughed when I offered to paint her portrait. "There are dozens of women more interesting on your wall," she said. "She doesn't realize she's different. She's the only one who makes my brushes dance." The following pages revealed a transformation. Fewer parties, fewer conquests, more art, more depth. Emma took up more and more space, not just in the diary, but in Thomas's life. She's Robert Lambert's daughter, the man my father destroyed. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Paul stopped reading, heart heavy. In a corner, an easel stood draped. Removing the cover, he found Emma's portrait. She smiled with her eyes, beauty captured not just with paint, but with love. "Keep searching," he told Bernard, voice strained. The apartment still had more secrets to reveal. On the computer desk, neatly arranged folders showed the evolution of Thomas's art. Early works, angry, experimental, slowly gave way to more mature, deeply emotional pieces. In a locked drawer, they found documents from a gallery. Thomas had planned a solo exhibition. The date was set for 1 week after his accident. He was changing, Paul murmured to no one in particular. All this time, in the bedroom, more surprises. A framed photograph on the nightstand showed Paul and Thomas years ago in a rare moment of harmony. Next to it was an invitation to the exhibition, never sent, with Paul's name at the top of the VIP list. "Mr. Donovan," Bernard called from the living room. "There's more." In a hidden compartment of a drawer, they found an envelope addressed to Emma. Inside was a letter dated the day before the accident. "My love, tomorrow. I'll tell him. About us, about the show, about everything. I don't want any more secrets. I refuse to hide our love in the shadows like these canvases in my studio. He needs to know I've changed, that I've found my path, that I've found you. Forever yours, T." Paul sank to the dusty floor, the letter trembling in his hands. Tears he hadn't shed in decades burned his eyes. "Leave me," he whispered to Bernard. In the silence of that studio, Paul Donovan finally came to know his son. Through unfinished canvases, unsent letters, and pages of a diary, Thomas was there, whole and authentic. He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had been avoiding for a year. "Anthony, bring the gallery paperwork. I'm buying this entire building." Pocketing his phone, he took one last look around the studio. The wall of empty conquests, the portrait of Emma, the letters never read. Everything would remain exactly as Thomas had left it. "I'll take care of everything, son," he promised the empty space. "Your babies, your legacy, all of it." As he left, and he locked the green door with reverence. Inside, the setting sun cast golden shadows on Emma's portrait, as if Thomas were still there with his brush, capturing light in the eyes of the woman who had changed his life. And, in some way, he was still changing everyone else's. Back at the estate, 4 tiny faces awaited him, each carrying pieces of the artist Paul Donovan had never truly known, until now. In the mansion's library, the silence was broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace and the occasional turning of a page. Paul, seated in his leather armchair, held Thomas's diary like a fragile relic. Next to him sat an untouched bottle of whiskey. Tonight, he needed a clear head. "March 15th, he began reading. "Today was different. I saw a boy sketching in the subway, no older than 12, raw talent dripping from his graphite-stained fingers. Reminded me of myself at that age, hiding sketches from Dad. I bought all his drawings. Tomorrow, I'm going back to find him." Paul paused, remembering how many times he'd found Thomas's drawings hidden in schoolbooks, always dismissing them as distractions. He turned the page. March 22nd. The boy's name is Lucas. He has 3 friends who are also artists, all living on the streets, all with as much talent as they have hunger. I rented that old workshop on Main Street. I'm going to teach them what I know about art. It's not much, but it's something. The following entries revealed a Thomas Paul had never envisioned. Amid party anecdotes and romantic escapades were accounts of small transformations, art lessons for homeless kids, donated supplies, nurtured dreams. April 12th. Lucas sold his first painting today. You should have seen the sparkle in his eyes. He used the money to buy school supplies for his younger sister. These kids, They teach me more than I could ever teach them. Paul stood and walked to the window. The night sky was clear, stars shining above the garden where 4 grandchildren now slept, a legacy of the son he never truly understood. April 30th. Emma came by the workshop today. She was looking for a place to hold free art classes. Fate has a twisted sense of humor. Robert Lambert's daughter, of all people. But there's something in her eyes, a kindness that completely disarmed me. As the entries went on, they chronicled a slow metamorphosis. Fewer parties, fewer superficial affairs, more art, more purpose. May 15th. Emma isn't like the others. We spent the entire afternoon with the kids, teaching them watercolor techniques. She has this gift. She makes each child feel special, seen, valued. I wish Dad could see me like that. Bernard entered quietly, handing Paul a folder. We found records for the workshop, sir. Your son documented everything. The photographs revealed a bright, spacious room, walls covered in children's artwork. One picture showed Thomas surrounded by kids, grinning broadly as he held a paintbrush. Another showed him and Emma side by side, helping a small group with a large canvas. May 28th, Lucas asked why I hide the workshop from my dad. He said Dad would be proud. Would he really? The great Paul Donovan, proud to see his heir playing teacher for homeless kids? Emma says I'm underestimating him. Maybe. Paul felt something hot trace down his cheek. A tear, the first in decades. June 10th. Emma and I are planning to expand the project. She has connections in the city council. We could get more space, help more kids. For the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something bigger than parties, women, or the Donovan Empire. The next pages outlined detailed plans, more workshops, charitable exhibits, scholarship programs. Thomas had secretly founded a fund to support it all. June 25th, Emma's right, I need to tell Dad about the workshop, our plans, about us. We organized a showcase of the kids' works for next month. I'll invite him. I want him to see I've found my path, even if it's different from the one he envisioned. Bernard cleared his throat softly. Sir, there's something else. He handed Paul an elegant invite never delivered. Emerging Artists Exhibition, Main Street Community Center. Date, 1 day after the accident. Paul kept reading, his hands trembling. June 30th. Emma and I talked about the future today. She understands my art in a way no one else ever has. When I paint her portrait, it feels like each brushstroke reveals a new layer of her soul. Tomorrow, I'll speak with Dad. No more secrets. That was the last entry. The next day, Thomas never made it to the dinner where he planned to reveal everything. Paul shut the diary, feeling the weight of truths unspoken. Bernard stood by with more documents, photos of the workshop, donation receipts, letters of thanks from parents whose children's lives had been changed by the project. The workshop still exists, sir, Bernard said softly. The kids kept it going. They call it Thomas's studio. Paul walked to the nursery. The 4 babies were resting peacefully, unaware of the chain of events they had set in motion. Mrs. Clare, he said quietly, have the car ready first thing tomorrow. There's a place I want to visit. Back in the library, he opened the diary one last time, rereading the entry about Lucas. His oldest grandson, he realized, had a similar eye shape, Emma's inheritance, not the Donovans. Bernard, find those kids, all of them. This project can't stop. The investigator nodded, understanding it was more than an order. It was a mission for redemption. On the library wall, a formal portrait of Paul seemed to observe the scene with new eyes. Tomorrow, he would remove it. In its place, he would hang photos of Thomas at the workshop, smiling, genuine, fulfilled. Tucked in Paul's pocket was the never-delivered invitation, weighing on him like a stone. An exhibition that never happened, a pride never expressed, words never spoken. But now, through 4 tiny miracles sleeping upstairs, and through the countless lives touched by Thomas's secret kindness, Paul was getting a second chance. Sir, Bernard broke into his thoughts one last time. There's one more thing you need to see. It was a recent photo of the workshop. On the back wall, a massive mural. Thomas and Emma, painted by the children, surrounded by vibrant colors and dreams made into art. Paul studied the image for a long moment. Tomorrow, he decided, we pay a visit to Robert Lambert. Because some stories must go on, even if their original authors are no longer around to write them. In the Donovan estate's living room, the polished floor now resembled a maze of photographs. Hundreds of them, arranged chronologically on makeshift tables, told the story of Thomas's last year of life. Paul and Say, eyes red from hours of scrutiny, peered through a magnifying glass at one photo in particular. This is the first time she appears. Bernard pointed to a picture dated March. It showed an art opening. Thomas casually smiling, and in the background, barely noticeable, a dark-haired young woman studying a painting. The Saint. James Gallery, Paul murmured, recognizing the venue, a benefit exhibit that he had dismissed as yet another reckless artistic venture of his son's. A soft cry echoed from the nursery monitor. Paul watched one of the babies stir, that tiny face scrunching up just like Thomas's whenever he was annoyed. A nurse quickly soothed the child, but not before Paul noticed for the 1000th time the delicate chin, so different from the Donovan line. "Go on," he instructed Bernard, returning to the photographs. The next series revealed a pattern. The mysterious woman showed up more frequently, first in group shots, then increasingly in Thomas's proximity. April, May, June. The progression was clear. Here, Bernard indicated a particular photo of Thomas and the woman in a small city park, sitting on a bench. She held a sketch pad. He gestured animatedly, their faces captured in a moment of pure joy. I zoomed in on every angle. The investigator showed additional prints. The sketch pad bears a watermark, Lambert Atelier. Paul felt his heart skip another beat at the name Lambert, which had haunted him for decades. "There's more," Bernard continued systematically, laying out yet another series, Thomas and the woman, Emma in various places. Cozy cafes, indie galleries, always far from the social circles of the elite. They were hiding, Paul realized, his voice laced with belated understanding. Another special file caught his eye. Project St. Denis was scrawled on the side. Inside were dozens of photos of the art workshop, kids painting, Thomas teaching, Emma organizing supplies. Each shot showed the growing bond between them, more profound each time. "Sir, Mrs." Claire interrupted softly. "The babies are awake. The doctor says it's time for their monthly checkup." Paul nodded and headed to the makeshift nursery. Dr. Price examined each baby carefully, jotting notes. "All developing perfectly," the doctor said with a smile. "And I must say, the resemblance to your son is remarkable." Indeed, every tiny gesture, every expression reminded Paul of Thomas, multiplied by 4. But there was more. The shape of their eyes, the soft curve of their chins, undeniably Emma Lambert. Back in the photo-filled living room, Bernard sorted a new batch. "These are the final days," he explained. The last pictures told a silent story. Thomas and Emma in a small chapel. He was on one knee, possibly a proposal. The date: 3 days before the accident. "We found the chapel," Bernard said. "The priest remembers them, said he'd never seen a couple so in love or so troubled." More photos appeared. The couple leaving a specialized medical clinic, Emma holding what looked like a test result. The date: 2 days before the accident. "The clinic refuses to provide information," Bernard anticipated the question. "But we found this." It was a shot from the parking lot. Emma getting into her car, a small pharmacy bag in hand. A close-up revealed a brand of home pregnancy test. Paul sank into a chair, the puzzle pieces falling into place like a cruel jigsaw. The accident hadn't happened on his way back from some random party. Thomas had been returning from that same neighborhood. "Sir," Bernard hesitated, "there's one last photo." The final image showed Thomas on his phone, leaning against his car, eyes shining with determination. The chapel tower loomed in the background, the date stamp, the night of the accident. "Traffic cameras," Paul muttered. "That curve where he—" "We've checked," Bernard said gently. "He was on his way here to the estate." Paul closed his eyes, the truth crashing over him. Thomas was coming to tell him everything. About Emma, about the baby. No one had known at the time there would be 4. A sharp cry interrupted his thoughts. The most restless baby, the one with the birthmark, was stirring. Without hesitation, Paul stood and walked toward the nursery. Scooping the little one into his arms, he noticed a small detail for the first time. The baby clung to the blanket just like Thomas used to cling to his old teddy bear, the same gesture spanning generations. "Sir," Bernard appeared at the door with yet another revelation. "We found a purchase record from the afternoon of the accident. It was a receipt from a classic jewelry store, an engagement ring, a timeless design with a custom inscription, 'For Emma, my eternal love, T.'" Paul gently rocked his grandson, glancing at the other three. Each one held a piece of Thomas, a piece of Emma, a love story tragically cut short. "That last photo," he said softly. Bernard handed him the final image, Thomas and Emma in the workshop, surrounded by children. Emma leaned on his shoulder, both smiled at the camera. In the background stood an unfinished canvas, her portrait he'd never complete. "Find her," Paul said, voice unsteady, "no matter what it takes. She deserves to know the babies are safe, that they're loved." The investigator nodded, gathering the photographs. Each image no longer just told a story of what was, they hinted at what still could be. In Paul's arms, the baby finally dozed off, a tiny fist clutching the grandfather's silk tie, just like Thomas used to do. "Mrs. Claire," he called gently, "get my office ready. I have an important call to make." It was time to face Robert Lambert, time to mend the mistakes of 2 generations. Because in these scattered photographs, in the tiny, sleeping faces of the quadruplets, in the love story of Thomas and Emma, there was an undeniable truth. Sometimes destiny offers a second chance. And Paul Donovan would not waste it. The small art gallery in the city's Bohemian Quarter looked exactly as it had a year ago. Paul regarded the front window, where posters advertised an exhibition for up-and-coming artists, the kind of event where, according to what he'd discovered, Thomas and Emma first met. "Mrs. Russo," Bernard addressed the grey-haired woman organizing catalogues, "we'd like to ask you about Thomas Lane." The woman froze at the name, turning slowly. Her eyes went wide when she recognized Paul. "Mr. Donovan," she whispered. "At last." In the small back room, amidst cups of strong tea and homemade cookies, Mrs. Russo unraveled the first thread of the story Paul had been chasing. "It was one March evening," she began, her gaze drifting into memory. "Thomas brought some paintings for a benefit auction. Emma was running an art workshop for disadvantaged kids next door." Paul sipped his tea, noticing the walls cluttered with photographs. One showed Thomas smiling while helping set up an exhibit. She criticized one of his pieces, Mrs. Russo recalled with a nostalgic smile, said it had talent but lacked soul. Thomas, who never took criticism well, was intrigued instead of offended. Bernard discreetly recorded her account, while Paul soaked in the details that painted such a different picture of his son. They talked all night about art, about purpose, about leaving a mark on the world, and the older woman continued. "When I finally closed the gallery at 2 in the morning, they barely noticed time had passed." In his pocket, Paul's phone vibrated, another message from the nursery nurse, including photos of the quadruplets. They were beginning to smile, their tiny faces lighting up with the same look he now saw in Thomas's photo on the wall. "Emma changed him," Mrs. Russo went on. "Before, he painted to impress, to shock. After she came along, he painted with his heart." Their next stop was a small cafe a few blocks away. The owner, Pete, vividly remembered the couple. "They had a favorite table, right there in the corner," he said, pointing. "Spent hours sketching, making plans, scribbling on napkins. Thomas always ordered extra strong coffee. Emma had jasmine tea." Paul looked at the table by the window, almost picturing his son leaning over sketches, truly happy for once. "One day," Pete continued, "Thomas showed me his plan for the art workshop. His eyes shone when he talked about giving talented kids a shot. Emma had awakened something in him, a desire to make a difference. At the workshop where Thomas taught, they found more pieces of the puzzle. Sarah, a 13-year-old student, remembered them well. "Emma would say art isn't just technique, it's heart," the girl said, showing off her drawings proudly. "And Thomas, he changed a lot. At first, he was just the cool teacher, but later he became our true friend." Paul inspected the drawings pinned on the wall, some by Thomas, Kai, and some by Emma. many by the students. Each piece embodied a story of transformation. They wanted to expand, Sarah explained. Thomas said they'd open more workshops, offer scholarships. Emma dreamed of a free art school. At an Italian restaurant where the couple often dined, the maitre d' Giuseppe had his own memories. One night, he recalled, pouring Paul a glass of wine, Thomas reserved the entire place, filled it with white roses, her favorite. He got down on one knee right there, pointing near the fireplace. Emma cried, "Sam, of course, we all did." Paul closed his eyes, imagining the scene. His son, who'd always avoided commitment, now planning a future. Their final witness for the day was Maria, an art teacher who shared the workshop space with the couple. Emma was glowing that last week, she said, fidgeting nervously with paintbrushes. Found out she was pregnant just days before. Thomas. I never saw him so happy or so terrified at the same time. Paul's heart clenched. Another message on his phone showed the babies. One had just discovered his own foot, prompting giggles from the others. I plan to tell you everything, Maria spoke gently. Emma kept insisting a grandfather has the right to know his grandchildren. The word grandchildren resonated in Paul's mind. At the time, it was just one baby. No one knew there would be 4 tiny miracles. The last time I saw them, Maria hesitated, tears filling her eyes, Thomas showed me the ring. He'd had an inscription done, "For Emma, my eternal love." They planned to marry in secret, then tell both families. Returning to the mansion, Paul paused by the nursery. The babies slept peacefully, each clutching a small plush bear, replicas of Thomas's childhood teddy. "Sir," Bernard spoke quietly, "we found something on Thomas's old phone. It was a voicemail never sent, recorded on the night of the accident. Dad, I'm on my way. I have something important to tell you. I've found my path. Dad, I found love, a purpose, everything. I hope you can understand, maybe even accept, maybe be proud of me." Paul sank into the nursery's corner chair, replaying the message in his mind. One of the babies stirred, blinking those determined blue eyes that mirrored Thomas's on his final night. "Bernard," Paul said softly, "how long until we locate Emma?" "We're close, sir." "Very close." Paul nodded, eyes drifting over the 4 cribs. In each tiny face, he now saw not just Thomas's features, but fragments of a powerful love story awaiting completion. "Make the necessary arrangements," he ordered. "When we find her, I want to be ready. They deserve to meet their mother. And his voice faltered, "I need to thank the woman who showed my son a path I never could." Outside, dusk fell upon the Donovan estate. Somewhere in this vast city, Emma Lambert carried her own sorrow, unaware that 4 little miracles were waiting for her return. And Paul Donovan, the man who had always controlled everything, realized that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive in mysteries we must find the courage to solve. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with red wax, a habit Thomas had picked up in his more romantic phase. Paul found it inside a large art book, The Great Masters, the same one he'd given Thomas on his 10th birthday. "Dad," the letter began in carefully measured handwriting, "by the time you read this, everything will have changed. I know you've always seen me as a disappointment, the son who picked paintbrushes over spreadsheets, dreams over profits. But today I discovered something that changes everything, something that makes all our differences meaningless." Paul paused to pour himself a whiskey. On the nursery monitor, the quadruplets slept peacefully. One, the most restless, squirmed, just like Thomas used to. "Emma is different from everyone I've ever known. Not because she's an extraordinary artist or because her beauty inspires me to paint non-stop. She's different because she makes me want to be better. She made me see there's a greater purpose than parties and empty conquests." Bernard entered silently, placing a dusty folder on the desk. "The Lambert Industries records are, sir. From the merger." Paul nodded, continuing the letter. "Yesterday I found out who she really is. I was at the workshop, organizing old photos for our benefit event, when I came across a snapshot of you, Dad, standing next to Robert Lambert, both smiling with your arms around each other. The caption read, 'Paul and Robert, 30 years of friendship.'" Paul's heart clenched. That photo was still locked in a drawer. He could never bring himself to throw it away. Emma is his daughter, Dad. The man you used to call your brother. The man you had to crush to build your empire, as you once said. Memories flooded Paul's mind. He and Robert, young and ambitious, building their businesses side by side. 30 years of Sunday lunches, family trips, shared confidences, until that fatal merger. I did some digging, learned how you used insider information, things you heard at our dinner table, to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Lambert Industries, how your best friend lost everything in a single day, how he tried to rebuild, only for you to block his every attempt. Paul rose, walking to the window. It was another clear night, stars shining over a city that had once seemed small enough for him to own. Emma doesn't know I know. She talks about her father with so much love and pride, how he rebuilt his life away from the spotlight, focusing on art and community programs, how he taught her that character matters more than bank accounts. One of the babies stirred in the monitor. Paul recognized it as the one with Thomas's birthmark. Now I see why she hesitated to talk about her family, why our dates were always out of sight. She's afraid our last names will destroy what we have, Paul continued, his hands trembling slightly. I had a dream a few nights ago, you and Uncle Robert, I still call him that in my mind, laughing together like in the old photos. I woke up determined to tell you everything about Emma, about our love, about the social project we started together, about how she helped me see that success isn't measured by zeros in the bank. Bernard cleared his throat. Sir, we found something else. He handed Paul an old photo. Paul and Robert on a sailboat, both in their 30s, raising their glasses in a toast. On the back, Robert's handwriting. To my soul brother, may our children grow as close as we are. Emma doesn't know I've learned the truth yet. She's afraid of how you'll react if you find out who she is, who her father is. She also fears how her dad will react if he learns I'm your son. Paul sank back into his chair, the final pages of Thomas's letter in his hands. There's more, Dad. Something wonderful and terrifying at the same time. Emma's pregnant. Your grandchild, maybe a grandson, maybe a granddaughter, will carry both Donovan and Lambert blood. Maybe this is a sign, a chance at redemption for our families. On the monitor, the quadruplets slept soundly. Paul gazed at their serene faces, a perfect blend of two legacies, two stories, two once best friends turned bitter rivals. Tomorrow, I'm coming to the mansion. I'm telling you everything, facing the consequences. Because Emma taught me some truths can't stay hidden. Some circles need closing. Maybe, just maybe, you'll be proud of the man I've become. The letter ended abruptly with one last line, scrawled hastily. I love you, Dad. Always have. Even when we couldn't understand each other, Thomas. Paul closed his eyes, silent tears falling down his face. The envelope's date was that of the accident. Thomas never made it to the mansion. He never got to tell his truth. Bernard, Paul said, voice hoarse. Find Robert. At any cost. The investigator nodded, leaving quietly. Paul remained in his office, holding Thomas's letter in one hand, the old sailboat photo in the other. Memories swirled. Robert holding infant Thomas, promising to be the best godfather ever. Christmas dinners, birthdays, fleeting moments that felt endless. In the nursery, a baby let out a soft sigh in his sleep. Paul climbed the stairs, stopping at each crib, studying every tiny face, a perfect blend of Thomas and Emma, of Donovan and Lambert. Your dad was right, he whispered to the sleeping infants. It's time for some truths. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he still knew by heart despite 20 years of silence. It was time to face Robert Lambert, because some stories deserve a different ending, and some mistakes, even after 2 decades, deserve a chance to be set right. Paul lingered in his office, an old photo album spread across the mahogany desk. The first picture showed 2 beaming young men fresh out of college, toasting with cheap beer in a tiny apartment, Robert Lambert and Paul Donovan, 1985. The beginning of everything. We'll conquer the world. Robert's voice rang through his memory, full of youthful bravado. Brothers, the universe forgot to give the same last name. The whiskey in Paul's glass remained untouched as he flipped through pages revealing a life that felt like someone else's. Robert cradling newborn Thomas in the hospital, Paul standing as Robert's best man at his wedding. Vacations, celebrations, frozen in smiling pictures that no longer existed in the present. "Sir," Bernard interrupted, "we've located the 2001 merger files." Paul shut his eyes. 2001, the year he ruined 3 decades of friendship for the sake of profit. "I planned every detail," he muttered, almost to himself. "Spent 6 months setting up the perfect trap." The plan had been brilliantly cruel, using privileged information gleaned from Sunday dinners at the Lamberts to orchestrate a hostile acquisition. Lambert Industries, Robert's life's work, would be swallowed by Donovan Corporation. "Robert trusted me implicitly," Paul continued, turning a page of the album. It showed a Christmas photo from 2000, the last they spent together. Robertine, his wife Marie, and little Emma, then 70, helping decorate a tree in the Donovan mansion. "He told me everything, his strategies, his expansions." Bernard placed a folder on the desk. Inside were old newspaper headlines. "Lambert Industries falls in surprise takeover. Donovan Empire acquires rival in aggressive move. Robert Lambert loses it all in a single day." "That board meeting," Paul recalled, voice heavy. "Robert came in smiling, gave me a hug like always. He had no idea I'd already bought off his majority shareholders." Paul relived every moment of that day in excruciating detail, Robert's expression shifting from amusement to shock, then to utter devastation as he realized the betrayal. "How could you do this, Paul?" Robert's last words to him. "It's not about the business, it's about our friendship." Paul walked to the window on the nursery monitor. The quadruplets slept in oblivion of the history they carried in their genes. "After that day," he told Bernard, "Robert tried multiple comebacks, small businesses, new ventures." "You blocked every single one," Bernard said softly, referencing his notes. It was true. Paul had leveraged his influence so banks would reject Robert's loan applications, suppliers would withdraw, investors would vanish. "Had to protect my investment," Paul repeated the old rationalization that now sounded hollow, even to himself. Another photo caught his eye. Emma at age 12, performing in a ballet recital. Paul had been there, hidden in the last row of the theater, even after destroying Robert, never able to ignore his goddaughter. "Robert sold everything," Bernard continued, "his home, his cars, even a family heirloom watch. He moved to a modest neighborhood, building his life again far from corporate circles." Paul opened another file, newspaper clippings about Lambert Gallery, a small but respected art space Robert had founded later. Photos showed art exhibits, community events, children's workshops. "He always loved art," Paul said. "We used to joke that I was the brains, and he was the heart of our joint ventures." A series of recent photos covered the table. Emma growing up into a talented artist, Robert E., now graying but smiling, running social projects through the gallery. "They live just 20 minutes from here," Bernard said quietly. Paul nodded, having kept tabs on Robert and Emma from a distance all these years. Out of guilt, he never admitted. "Emma grew up hearing stories about the Donovans," Bernard continued. "About how you destroyed their family, how her father had to start over with nothing. Yet she and Thomas still found each other," Paul replied, staring at a recent photo of them together, fate's grand irony. On the nursery monitor, one baby stirred, a sweet, sleepy yawn. "Sir," Bernard hesitated. "There's more you should see." It was surveillance footage from a coffee shop. Robert, now in his 60s, sitting alone with a newspaper open to Thomas's accident report. "He wept for an hour," Bernard said quietly. "The man who supposedly hated the Donovans, crying over your son's death." Paul felt tears sting his eyes, recalling Robert teaching Thomas to swim, cheering at his first steps, promising to be the best godfather. "Emma never told her father about Thomas," Bernard added. "From what we found, she intended to do so only after the two of them told you." The baby started fussing again in the monitor. Paul headed for the nursery, heavy with years of regret. "Robert is ill," Bernard continued, following him. "Heart problems. The doctors—" "Enough," Paul cut him off, picking up the crying infant. The baby calmed instantly, gripping the tie around Paul's neck, just like Thomas. Paul gazed down at the serene little face, so reminiscent of his son yet carrying Lambert traits, a potent symbol of both legacies. "Get the car ready for tomorrow," he told Bernard. "Time to see an old friend. Because some debts must be paid, some stories rewritten, and some bonds, no matter how badly broken, deserve a chance to heal." In the quiet nursery, Paul Donovan, who once destroyed his most precious friendship for ambition, rocked his grandson gently, living proof that destiny sometimes paves unexpected roads to redemption. Bernard found Emma Lambert in a small coastal town in Southern California. The report arrived on Paul's desk one Thursday morning, along with a recent photo. Emma seated at a seaside cafe, her face thinner than before, eyes filled with a sadness even the bright Pacific sun couldn't dispel. "She works at a local gallery," Bernard said, spreading more pictures on the desk. "Lives alone, rarely goes out. Locals say she arrived a few months ago, right after leaving the babies," Paul completed, scrutinizing every detail of the images. The subsequent findings fell into place like a heartbreaking puzzle. Emma had confirmed her pregnancy 3 days after Thomas's accident. The positive test, the prenatal appointment, then the earth-shattering news. Not 1 baby, but 4. "We retrieved the medical records," Bernard continued. "It was a high-risk pregnancy from the start. The doctors recommended reducing the number of fetuses, but she refused." Paul closed his eyes, imagining the weight of that solitary decision. On the nursery monitor, the quadruplets played in their cribs, oblivious to the drama behind their existence. During a routine appointment, Bernard went on, she saw a news clip on the 30th anniversary of Donovan Corporation. There you were on the financial channel, an overview of your career, with old footage of you and Thomas. That was likely when she discovered Thomas was Paul Donovan's son, the same man her father blamed for losing everything. She went home that night. Bernard checked his notes. Confronted Robert with the truth. That scene, reconstructed by eyewitnesses in a tiny cafe near Lambert Gallery, had been explosive. Robert, long burdened by decades of bitterness, learning that his only daughter was carrying 4 grandchildren fathered by the son of his worst enemy. "How could you?" Robert had shouted. "A Donovan." His son. "I loved him, Dad," Emma had cried, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas wasn't like that. He was kind, generous. He had a heart. He had his father's blood. The man who ruined our lives." Robert's voice boomed. Customers at the nearly empty cafe witnessed the father-daughter argument escalate. Emma protected her belly, which was visibly carrying multiples, while defending a love that went beyond old rivalries. "They'll be your grandchildren, Dad," she pleaded. "Your only grandchildren." "Grandchildren?" Robert had laughed bitterly. "Little Donovans who will carry on the destructive legacy of their grandfather." Emma fled the cafe in tears, ignoring Robert's calls. That same night, she packed and vanished. She spent the following months drifting through small towns, Bernard explained, always using aliases, always finding quiet places to stay. The multiple pregnancy made everything harder. Medical files showed her complications worsened over time. Emma, determined to go through with the pregnancy, spent her final weeks on strict bed rest. "That's when she started planning," Bernard said, placing new documents on the table. "We found drafts of letters, all addressed to you." Paul picked up the pages with trembling hands. Emma's usually fluid, artistic handwriting looked shaky. "Dear Mr. Donovan, you don't know me, but I'm carrying your grandchildren, 4 little miracles who are half Thomas and half me. I know you and my father share a painful history, but these children deserve more than our past resentments." More attempts followed, each unfinished, each struggling to find the right words for an impossible situation. "The birth was premature," Bernard said quietly. 8 months, serious complications. Emma almost died. Hospital photos showed 4 tiny infants in incubators. Emma, pale and weak, observing them through the glass, tears silently falling. "Then she made her decision," Bernard concluded. "She waited until the babies were stable and hatched a plan in secret." The night of the drop had been painstakingly chosen. Paul's return from a business trip, a forecast of heavy storms, security guards changing shifts. Emma, still recovering, oversaw every detail. "The letter," Paul whispered. "Just 3 words. Take care of them. Bernard said. She believed that once you saw them, once you noticed the resemblance to Thomas. Paul stood and headed for the nursery. All four were awake now, each gripping a favorite plush bear. In their faces, he saw the Donovans and the Lamberts, a union that not even 30 years of hatred could erase. Where exactly is she now, he asked, voice thick with emotion. Bernard handed him an envelope with a precise address. She's working on art restoration. Lives simply, avoids contact. But, he paused. There's one more thing you should know. The latest photos showed Emma on a small balcony, gazing at the sunset. In her hands, a framed picture of the quadruplets, the same photo Paul had quietly released to the press, hoping she'd see it. She's followed them from a distance, Bernard said. Cuts out every little news mention, keeps every photo she can find. Paul collapsed into his armchair, decades of guilt weighing on him. Memories flashed. His betrayal of Robert, Thomas's death, 4 babies at his door on a stormy night. Get everything ready, he said finally. Tomorrow we'll make 2 stops. Bernard raised an inquisitive eyebrow. First, we see Robert, Paul clarified, eyes on the quadruplets. Then Emma, because some stories need more than an ending. They need a new beginning. And these 4 little angels, born of Thomas and Emma's love, deserved more than a legacy of resentment. They deserved a whole family, healed and redeemed. Bernard, Paul added when the investigator was at the door, bring the latest baby photos, all of them. Because a mother, no matter the circumstances, deserves to know her children are growing strong, healthy, and most of all, loved. The small coastal town awoke lazily under the morning sun. Robert Lambert, exhausted after another sleepless night of fruitless searching, stared out at the waves crashing onto the deserted beach. His hands trembled as he held a worn photo of Emma, the last one he'd taken, months before she vanished. Mr. Lambert. The familiar voice tightened his chest. Paul Donovan stood a few steps away, Bernard by his side. The sleek black Rolls-Royce clashed with the modest fishermen's cottages lining the shore. I don't need your help, Robert muttered, turning to leave. But I need yours, Paul replied softly. For them, Bernard offered a thick envelope. Inside were dozens of photographs of the quadruplets. First smiles, first baths, priceless moments that made Robert's heart ache as he recognized Emma's features in each tiny face. They're your grandchildren, Robert, Paul continued. They're ours. The word family hung between them, loaded with 30 years of heartbreak and regret. Robert closed his eyes, memory flooding back. Paul holding a newborn Thomas, promising to be the best godfather, the 2 men celebrating business successes, the betrayal that tore them apart. Why now? He asked, voice raw. Because Thomas showed us a better way, Paul answered, offering his son's diary. Read. Robert hesitated before taking the journal. Page by page, he discovered a Thomas unlike the spoiled playboy he'd imagined. An artist, passionate about helping others, madly in love with Emma Lambert. Mr. Lambert, Bernard interrupted politely. We've found her. Robert's heartbeat thundered in his ears. A small gallery in a quiet beach town, the doors freshly painted. Through the glass, they saw Emma arranging brushes and paints, her delicate figure moving with the grace she'd had since childhood. Emma, he called softly, pushing the door open. She froze, the paintbrush slipping from her fingers. Turning slowly, her eyes went wide as they fell on her father, then on Paul. How? She began, voice faltering. The babies need their mother, Paul said gently, showing her his phone screen with a live feed from the nursery. 4 smiling faces with wide blue eyes. And you need them. Emma staggered. Robert rushed to support her, enveloping her in an embrace that held years of repressed love. The familiar scent of her shampoo made him choke back sobs. Forgive me, daughter, he whispered into her hair, for everything. Dad, she sobbed, clinging to him like a child. Thomas, he was so different from what we thought. I know, sweetheart, Robert soothed her. Now I know. Paul watched, tears tracing silent paths down his austere face. From his pocket, he withdrew another envelope. We found this in his apartment, he said, handing Emma one last letter from Thomas. Emma's hands trembled as she read, My love, by the time you read this, I'll have told Dad everything. About us, about our future, about how your love made me want to be better. I know there's a painful history between our families, but love is stronger than any old hatred. Watching you sleep last night, I realized it's not just you and me anymore. We're the start of something new. Our families lost their way, but our love can heal decades of resentment. Forever yours, Thomas. The letter slipped from her shaking hands. Paul picked it up reverently. He was coming to tell me that night, Paul explained softly. Wanted to do right by everyone. Fix our mistakes. Robert stepped forward, facing his old friend. 30 years of bitterness weighed on them both. Paul, he began, voice thick with emotion. No, Paul interrupted. I'm the one who needs to apologize for the betrayal, the greed, destroying our friendship over money. He swallowed hard. And for making you lose the godson you loved so much. They looked at each other, decades of resentment dissolving in the small art gallery. The babies, Emma whispered, eyes fixed on Paul's phone screen where her children wriggled. They're so big now. And they need their mum, Paul smiled gently. The car's outside. There's a plane waiting. But the gallery, Emma started. The Donovan Lambert Foundation just acquired this space, Bernard explained, showing her documents, to grow the community art project you and Thomas began. Emma looked questioningly at Paul. It's time to honor his legacy, he replied simply. In every way possible. The journey back was quiet, each person lost in reflection. On the private jet, Emma slept for the first time in months, her head on her father's shoulder. Robert watched her, recalling long drives when she was a sleepy little girl. She has your smile, Paul commented softly to Robert. Thomas always said so. Robert nodded, tears gliding down his cheeks. That day, he began, when you took my company, it was the greatest mistake of my life, Paul finished. I lost my best friend for the sake of profit. But now, he glanced at Emma, we have a chance to start over. Because of them. Late afternoon sunlight bathed the Donovan estate when they arrived. The babies had just woken from their nap, their little faces lighting up at the sight of new people. Emma approached the cribs tentatively. The first baby, the one with the birthmark, reached for her as if instinctively recognizing her. Hi, my loves, she whispered, lifting him gently. Mommy's home. In the weeks that followed, changes came swiftly. Emma moved into the east wing of the mansion with the quadruplets. Robert relocated his community projects under the new foundation. Donovan Corporation and the remnants of Lambert Industries merged officially, this time as equal partners. Thomas's old studio became a vibrant space for Emma and the babies. Once sterile walls now displayed playful child art alongside museum-quality pieces. One afternoon, almost a year later, Paul found Robert in the garden. They watched Emma play on the grass with the quadruplets, her laughter echoing through the estate grounds. You know, Robert said, a gentle smile on his lips. Thomas made it happen. What did he do? He brought us together again. Through his love for Emma, through these little angels. Robert paused, voice choked. He gave us a second chance. Paul nodded, watching the grandchildren giggle at Emma's antics. Each giggle carried traces of his son, living on through them. I think it's time, he said suddenly. Robert raised an eyebrow. To rename the company, Paul explained. How about Donovan Lambert and Grandkids? Robert chuckled, a sound Paul hadn't heard in decades. Thomas would like that, Robert agreed. On the lawn, the babies found a new source of entertainment, painting their hands and leaving colorful prints all over Emma's white dress. She laughed, her face glowing with a joy that finally reached her eyes. The sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting a golden haze across the mansion. In Paul's office, the old photo of him and Robert on the sailboat now hung in a place of honor. Next to it, a new photo, the two old friends reconciled, Emma standing between them, 4 little miracles completing the picture. Somewhere, Thomas was surely smiling, knowing his final wish had come true. Love had triumphed over hatred. Because some stories demand more than a happy ending. They need a fresh start. And through 4 tiny angels, 2 families once shattered by resentment found not just redemption, but a future rich with possibilities. A future built not on fortunes or corporations, but on what Thomas had always known to be more important: love, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. In that sense, maybe Thomas never really left. His legacy lived on in each brushstroke Emma shared with their children, in every step Paul and Robert took toward reconciliation, and in every bright blue pair of eyes that gazed at the world with wonder. Some blessings come wrapped in storms and mysteries. The Donovan Lambert family would forever carry the memory of a night when 4 tiny babies appeared at a mansion door, changing everything and proving that a broken past can still bloom into a beautiful tomorrow.